If you want to learn like a first-class law student, you need to stop taking notes. You see, when we're at school, we're never actually taught how we should study or how we should learn. And that means that we end up embracing a default position where we think things like underlining and taking notes directly from the textbook and rote memorisation are all beneficial in our endeavour to learn something new. When the truth is that all of these things are completely passive and ineffectual ways of studying something, and this has been confirmed by literally hundreds of different studies. So in this video, I'll be breaking down the two-step method that every law student should use when it comes to studying law. Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Gareth and I'm a lawyer and law lecturer based in Oxford in the UK. And as a newbie law student, I remember the specific challenges I faced when it came to studying law. I remember lecturers chucking hundreds of different pieces of legal information at me, whether it was cases, whether it was journal articles, whether it was textbooks, and I had literally no guidance on how I should be studying this material. Fortunately, there are two key steps that law students should be taking when it comes to studying. Firstly, you need a process of actually understanding the law, and then secondly, you need a process of remembering the law. And if you take nothing else from this video, just know that good learning is the combination of understanding and remembering. And if you can learn properly, you're going to do really well in your exams and eventually you're going to get a great job too. So let's get into it. The first stage of effective learning is understanding, and this is a process whereby we focus less on the note-taking element of studying law and rather on breaking the law down into useful chunks of information that we can use as the basis of learning later on. All in all, the whole process of breaking down the information into smaller bite-sized chunks can completely negate the point of taking notes in the first place. You don't need to be taking notes because it's completely passive. You're not actually learning anything from the note-taking process. It just gives you a feeling of productivity, but isn't actually helping you to know the law any better. So from my perspective, note-taking is completely pointless, and here's why. Firstly, taking notes in law lectures is pretty much entirely unnecessary. If I sat in a law lecture today, I think I'd see 90% of the law students there tapping away at their keyboards like court stenographers, but I really don't think many of them are actually taking in any of the information at all. Perhaps the only time where I would say taking notes in a law lecture is necessary is to ensure you stay awake, because most law lectures I find today are pretty boring. And the reason for this is because law lectures aren't actually getting paid to help out the students at all. Well, they are, but it's not really their main job. Perhaps the only other time that I would put pen to paper within my lecture would be to condense whatever the lecturer is saying to me. So very often a lecturer will talk about one slide for 10 or so minutes and really go off on a complete tangent, not really focused on what they should be saying. And it's very, very easy for you to summarise everything they say on that particular slide into one or two sentences. So at the very, very most, I would be summarising each slide into a quick sentence summary. If you want to see some information about how I take notes in my law lectures, I have written an article about this and I will put that in the description below. Taking notes after the lecture is also pretty pointless, and this may be quite a controversial point for some of you. But the point is that if there's already resources out there that have already condensed all the the cases, all the journals, all the textbooks, why would you spend all of your own time trying to do exactly the same job? For instance, I've done this very thing with digestible notes. I've condensed textbooks, I've condensed journal articles, I've condensed cases, all for your own learning pleasure. So you can literally go onto that website now for free, check it out and learn all the relevant pieces of information for your law degree right away. Now some of you will be saying, hold on a second, look, I use summarising and summarising textbooks and journal articles as a process of helping me to actually understand and learn the law. But if you actually look at the substantial amount of evidence there is out there, you'll find that summarising information like this is generally regarded as a very low utility thing to do. For example, in one study by Dunlosky et al. In 2013, they looked at a number of different study techniques and sort of ranked them from being low utility to high utility, where low utility study techniques are those which don't really have much of an impact on the way in which we learn and memorise information. And the 5 techniques that they highlighted as being low utility were highlighting, rereading, using mnemonics, summarisation and imagery. So why even take notes? Now, I'm not saying that taking notes is entirely stupid and entirely pointless, but I'm saying that taking notes has a purpose, and that purpose is to consolidate information from disparate sources and bring it all into one place so you can then break down that information into useful chunks that you can easily digest and remember when it comes to the exams itself. And so this leads me on to a discussion of the Feynman Technique, which I explained in a little bit more depth in my video on how I ranked first at law school. The Feynman Technique involves collecting all the relevant information you need on a particular legal topic, whether that's from the textbooks, from the cases, from the journals, etc., and then putting that all into one place. And I like to do this on an app called Notion. And then once I've got all the information together, I start to break that down into very simple summaries. And I use a process of progressive summarisation where I start with quite a detailed summary and I eventually break it down until I have a very simple overview summary of a particular legal topic. So if we just hop over to digestible notes, we can see how I use the Feynman technique to break down the content requirements of an easement into a simple and easily digestible format. You can quickly see the 4 content requirements, and as we scroll down the page, each of these requirements is broken down into a few brief bullet points. It's this level of simplicity you want to achieve. This is the only extent to which you should be taking notes when it comes to studying law. You should be gathering together all the information, you should be condensing down that information, and then you should be focusing on learning the information. And this whole process should take no more than about an hour to do. So once you've got all the information, you've condensed it down, we want to focus on the learning and forget about taking any more notes on the subject. Remembering is the second step in our effective 2-step process for studying. And the important point is that we can't rely on memorisation. So by going through the understanding phase of this 2-step process, this should mitigate any chance of us having to rely on rote memorisation. So remember this, memorisation is bad and learning is good. In the remembering phase, your objective is to make everything an active process. In the same study by Dunlosky in 2013, it was found that using practice testing or active recall and distributed practice or spaced repetition was the most high utility way of learning and studying any subject. So it's this that we want to embrace when it comes to studying law. I talked more about spaced practice in a previous video, but it essentially means learning the law over increasingly extended time intervals so that you can interrupt what Ebbinghaus dubbed the forgetting curve. So although to begin with, when it comes to learning any new legal topic, you're going to have to review that quite often, maybe every few hours or maybe every other day. But increasingly over time, you can look at those legal topics at increasing intervals of time, a week, a month, and so on, and still have the same level of comprehension. But as I say, if you want to learn more about that, then make sure you check out my video on how I memorised everything in law school. However, it's the active recall element of studying that I think is more important for me to mention here today. Active recall involves actively testing yourself on the subjects as you go along. So instead of learning directly from your boring set of notes as most law students would, you want to transform everything that you learn into a series of questions that you can ask yourself time and time again. The notes you are making are just ways to reference information as and when you need it. So if you can't answer one of these questions that you're writing down, then you've got a very easy source of information to refer back to. So you're condensing the information as a sort of legal database for when you get stuck later on down the line. But it's the actual questions and the active recall of that knowledge that's going to encode it in your long-term memory. For example, in the pretty awesome book Make It Stick, which I'm going to link below the video, there was this medical student who was struggling at the bottom of his class. He'd been relying on taking notes from his books, he'd been relying on rereading and highlighting and underlining. And simply by switching to active recall and self-quizzing, he was able to take himself from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. So if you want to remember your legal cases and these boring legal facts, try and transfer all your knowledge into a question bank, which you can refer back to periodically using a system of spaced repetition. In other words, if your legal grades aren't quite where you want them to be, just try and test yourself some more. Stop trying to take notes and then going back to them once the exam comes along. Actually move that knowledge into a series of questions which you can come back to time and time again, which ensures you're encoding that knowledge into that long-term memory. Studying like a first-class law student really isn't that difficult if you follow these two key components of effective study: understanding and remembering. If you remember these 2 points, there is no reason why you too can't be the top of your class. If you want to learn a bit more about how you can learn everything in law school, I also have a video on that which breaks down the different methods of incorporating spaced repetition and active recall into your legal studies. Also, if you have any suggestions about the sorts of videos that you want me to make in my next videos, then make sure you leave a comment below. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.